Hey, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use embossing powder and a heat gun to make books, cards, and flashcards tactile and accessible for our kids. So I'm going to go ahead and do the Harold and the Purple Crayon book. It's actually one of my favorite childhood books. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through and trace the purple lines with embossing powder. I actually did it on the first 2 pages, and you probably can't get it. I think you can kind of see where the moon is. You can kind of see the shininess of it. But with the embossing powder, it actually gives a really good tactile feedback. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use powder and then just trace something in the book. I guess some tidbits before. I would recommend taking a typical Swiffer dry duster thing and kind of sweeping it down. The static electricity helps get all the dust before you emboss. And board books and paper books are fine to do heat embossing on. The heat doesn't do anything with it. If you notice that I didn't braille the book yet, and the reason why is because if I do heat emboss a book, I actually braille it after I'm done with the heat embossing, because the heat gun could actually melt the braille labels. So I actually would save the brailing until after I'm done with the heat embossing. So to do the heat embossing, we're gonna use essentially 3 things. We're gonna use an embossing pen, an embossing ink pen, and embossing powder, and a heat gun. There are a lot of different powders out there. It could actually tend to become really overwhelming. For example, you have sparkle glitter out there. You have the typical regular fine embossing powder. You have metallic color powder, different color powder. For our purposes, I would highly recommend using the ultra thick embossing powder. And the reason why is because embossing powder is essentially tiny plastic grains. And what happens is when you heat it up, it melts, and it kind of melts together, and it creates that tactile element. With the fine typical embossing powders, these are great for detail, but it doesn't give enough feedback for our kids when they touch the books. The thick one, it melts really thick and high, and so it's gives a better tactile feedback. I personally would stay away from the sparkle or the glitter embossing powder. I'm pretty sure for making cards and other purposes, and for scrapbooking purposes, and they're beautiful, but I've experienced that the sparkle ones, the lines are really they're not consistent because of the glitter elements in it, and also when you emboss them, they tend to melt wide and flat instead of up. So the tactile feedback is not good. So I would highly recommend getting something that is a thicker embossing powder. What I would recommend is doing this on top of a piece of folded paper. Just it helps you collect the embossing powder, makes it easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go ahead and do the apple tree. Okay. And so this is actually an embossing marker. It's made by Ranger. I personally really like this brand because first of all, it's clear. So, it doesn't interrupt the pictures of it. It makes it really look neat. And also it has a long set time. So once you make the drawing with the ink pen, it actually stays damp for about 10 minutes. So you still have some time to manipulate the artwork, and you still have time to draw and then put the embossing powder on. Pretty much any stamping ink pad will work, but I would definitely recommend using the one specifically meant for embossing. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and trace the apple with the marker. I'm going to try to do this upside down so that you guys could see. I'm not a very good artist. And you could trace over and over and over, depending on how thick you want the consistency. And like I said, the thing with Rangers is their products stay damp really long, so you don't have to worry about it drying out before you're done with your picture. I would say that the only challenge to this is, since it is clear, you tend to not see your mistakes until afterwards. But you can pretty much just trace anything. If you want the picture to be a little bit more detailed and more and finer, then you'd obviously not trace over it. I'm just tracing it over just because I like the lines to be really thick. So after I do that, I don't know if you can see it, but it's a little wet. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your embossing powder and you're going to just, let me go ahead and put this down a little bit lower so you guys can see. You're going to go ahead and pour powder liberally on the drawing. And you'll actually start seeing where it sticks. Did I do the moon? I did not do the moon. Okay. So you actually start seeing the powder stick to the ink. I like to just kind of go over it too, just to make sure. And if you want to see, you'll see how it's got the little grains on the picture. Okay. And what I do is I actually just go ahead and put this back. And it actually doesn't take up a lot to make that. So you'll see that that's what it looks like. And I'm going to go ahead and pause the video and go ahead and set it with the heat gun. And it looks like I missed an apple, but I'll go ahead and get that afterwards. Okay, so I actually went ahead and did the heat gun, and you'll notice that that kind of unclear murkiness has gone away. And if you tilt it, you could see where it's got the tactile elements on it. And so now it's actually all really bumpy. If you could see that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that for the rest of the book. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'd love to help. I do a lot of arts and crafts and kind of incorporate that to help my kid out. So thanks.